Out in the New Mexico desert, a 1 to 2 year old elephant calf lay pressed against his mother's body and refused to let anyone near her. A dust storm was racing in, scavengers were already circling, and the rescue team had just 90 minutes. Yet, he wouldn't move, like leaving would make her disappear all over again. Then something happened that stopped everyone cold. The calf reached out and gently touched an old dog's tail. At the edge of a New Mexico wildlife preserve, the desert held its breath. Heat shimmered above cracked clay, and the wind combed the grass until it lay flat and defeated. In that wavering quiet, a young elephant calf lay pressed against his mother's side, as if his small body could still loan her warmth and buy her one more breath. The sun hung white overhead, unforgiving. He was no more than 2, all knobby knees and oversized ears that caught every sound. Dust clung to the soft creases behind them, and his lashes were stuck together with dried tears. His trunk rested across her face like a blanket he didn't know how to fold away. Every minute he nudged her, gentle, then urgent, then desperate. He kept bumping, then pulling back, afraid to hurt her. Somewhere beyond the scrub, a highway hummed with indifferent traffic, too far to see, close enough to feel. Milo heard it and didn't understand it. He only understood her. He leaned in, cheek to her ribs, listening for the low drum he'd known since birth. When he found nothing, he rumbled, a small, cracked sound that broke the air. He stayed pinned to her flank, guarding her fading scent. When the first ranger truck crested the low ridge, Milo lifted his head. His eyes were wet but steady, the way storm clouds look before they split open. He didn't trumpet. He didn't charge. He simply shifted closer to her and angled his body between her head and the approaching men, making himself a wall the world would have to ask permission to pass. Captain Rick Morales stepped out slow, palms open, voice low. He'd seen grief in the wild, but the way this calf laid down beside the body, flat to the ground, shoulder welded to her hide, felt like a choice, not an accident. Behind Rick, the radios hissed with weather alerts, a dust storm building fast to the west, thick as smoke. Grit already coated his tongue. Panic was coming. Dr. Sarah Bennett arrived minutes later in a rescue SUV, tires spitting red grit. She cut the engine and listened for birds, insects, anything alive. There was nothing. Only Milo's ragged breathing and the thin, shifting wind. Her hand hovered over her medkit, then dropped. This wasn't medicine yet. This was a heartbreak standing guard. Sarah had learned to read animals, but this one read her. Milo watched her the moment she took one careful step forward. His trunk snapped up, not to strike, but to warn. He rose with awkward speed, planted his feet, and blocked her view of his mother's face. A low rumble rolled out of him, more plea than threat, so deep Sarah felt it in her ribs. She stopped, letting distance become her respect. Milo's ears spread wide, trying to look bigger. Rick leaned in close to Sarah. "We can't wait him out," he murmured. "Coyotes have been circling the washes, and if that storm hits, he'll bolt blind, right into the fence line or down to the road." Sarah kept her eyes on Milo. The calf didn't look away. He looked like he was guarding a promise he'd never been taught to break. Her voice stayed steady. Her hands stayed at her sides. A young volunteer named Evan climbed out last, eager and terrified, clutching a bottle of water like it could fix anything. He took a step without thinking, boot crunching too loud on brittle brush. Milo flinched and slammed his trunk into the dirt. Dust burst up in a harsh cloud. Evan froze mid-breath, and for a second, even the wind seemed to pause. "Back!" Rick barked, sharper than he meant. Evan stumbled away, face flushing with shame. Milo didn't chase. He dropped back down beside his mother again, folding his legs under himself with a tenderness that made Sarah's throat tighten. He pressed his forehead to her shoulder, listening, still listening, like the right kind of quiet could bring her back. Sarah's gaze slid over the cow's neck and caught a faint ring of rubbed skin, half hidden beneath dried mud. Not a natural bruise, not a fresh wound. A mark like something had once tightened there. Metal, rope, a collar long gone. It wasn't proof, but it was a whisper. Sarah felt unease sharpen into purpose, like a splinter she couldn't ignore. She filed it away and forced herself to breathe slow. The radio crackled. "Morales, wind speed increasin'. You've got about 90 minutes before visibility drops." Rick stared west, where a tan wall smeared the horizon and rose higher by the minute. "We sedate the calf, we lift him, we move," he said. Sarah shook her head once. "If we steal him from her, we may lose him anyway." The storm would erase tracks and turn rescue into chaos. Milo shifted, as if he'd understood the word steal. He traced his mother's ear with the tip of his trunk, slow, careful, then tucked his face into her hide again. For a moment, he was too still, and Sarah felt the awful thought. Grief wasn't just keeping him here. It was trying to keep him from living. Rick signaled the team to spread wide. Time was running out. The desert didn't change fast, but the sky did. A pale curtain of dust thickened on the western edge of the world, turning the sunlight flat and mean. Milo lay with his shoulder welded to his mother's ribs, blinking grit from his lashes. Every few breaths, he nudged her again, as if the right touch could restart the day. Rick's team moved like they were walking on glass. Boots placed softly. Voices swallowed. They formed a wide half circle, not to trap Milo, but to keep him from bolting toward the fence line. Milo watched the shifting shapes with quiet suspicion, then tucked his trunk back over his mother's face, guarding her like a blanket. Sarah crouched near the SUV, keeping her body low, her hands visible. She didn't reach for the dart case yet. She watched Milo's ears, how they rose at every radio hiss, how they drooped when the wind sighed. His grief had a rhythm, the kind that wasn't loud, but heavy, the kind that could last until it turned dangerous. Rick checked his watch, then the horizon. 90 minutes, he said, voice tight. Then we can't see our own hands. He glanced at Milo's small frame. If predators smell this body, they won't wait for the storm. The word predators didn't register to Milo. The urgency in Rick's stance did. Evan hovered behind the trucks, trying to be useful and failing. He held out a bottle of water like an apology. Rick waved him back. Milo's eyes tracked Evan anyway. Not hatred, not fear. A tired kind of vigilance, like a child guarding a door after the lights go out, certain something terrible will return. Sarah stepped one pace closer, then stopped. Milo rose again, fast for such a young body. He didn't charge. He braced. His trunk curled up, trembling at the tip. A low rumble rolled through him, not a warning to fight, but a demand to be understood. Sarah felt it as much as she heard it, and her chest tightened. "Dart him," Rick said, quieter now, almost pleading. "We lift, we load, we go. Simple." Sarah shook her head once. "Simple isn't always kind," she replied. "He wakes up alone, confused, and he'll run. He'll hurt himself, or he'll hurt us, and he'll learn humans are the ones who stole his mother." Rick's jaw flexed. He wasn't cruel. He was practical. "And if we do nothing, he dies right here," he said. His words were meant for Sarah, but Milo's ears flicked as if he felt the argument in the air. He backed toward his mother and lowered his head, pressing it into her hide like he was trying to disappear inside her. A sharp gust hit, lifting dust into spirals. Milo flinched and spread his ears wide. Sarah saw the edge of panic, the thin place where grief could tip into flight. She signaled the Rangers to widen their stance and soften their bodies. No sudden moves, no direct line toward him. A corridor, not a cage. Then Rick's radio crackled with another voice, strained. "Captain, you seeing that vehicle on the ridge?" Rick turned his head slightly, not wanting to spook Milo. Far off, a pickup sat parked where it didn't belong, angled like it was watching. Sunlight flashed on the windshield, then vanished. Sarah felt the hair rise on her arms. Rick handed a Ranger binoculars and kept his own posture calm. "Could be a ranch hand," someone muttered, but nobody sounded convinced. Evan swallowed hard. Milo lowered to the ground again beside his mother, as if sensing the human's attention had shifted. He pressed his trunk along her cheek, slower now, almost ceremonial. Sarah's eyes returned to the rubbed ring on the cow's neck. The mark looked older than today, but wrong all the same, like something had been there, and then removed in a hurry. She pictured the pickup, the coming storm, the way dust could erase footprints like water. The thought landed cold. They weren't just racing weather. Rick spoke into the radio, asking for a plate check, backup, anything. Static answered back, swallowed by wind. He looked at Sarah, and the fight drained into something closer to compromise. "We can't stay exposed," he said. "If that truck is trouble, the storm is cover." Sarah nodded, but her eyes stayed on Milo. Milo shifted, and for the first time, he lifted his head toward the ridge, as if he'd heard something no one else could. His trunk rose and tasted the air. He wasn't thinking about trucks or storms. He was searching for his mother's scent, for her voice, for a world that had made sense an hour ago. When he found only dust, he gave a soft, broken rumble. Sarah took a slow breath and made a choice that wasn't safe, but felt right. She kept the dart case closed. "Give me a little time," she told Rick. "Let me try something gentler before we break him." Rick stared at Milo, then at the darkening horizon, and finally nodded once. "Until the first wall hits us," he said. "Then we do it my way." Ranger came out of the SUV like he belonged to the desert. He was an old K9 with a graying muzzle and a calm that didn't ask permission. Sarah clipped the leash on, then loosened it until it barely mattered. Milo watched the dog with his head low, eyes narrowed, not sure if this was another threat or something else. Sarah didn't send Ranger straight in. She let him circle wide, nose down, reading the ground the way elephants read a story in dust. The Rangers held their positions, forming a quiet arc. Rick kept his hand near the dart case, but he didn't move. Everyone waited on Milo's next breath like it might decide the whole day. Milo rose slowly, joints stiff from staying pressed to his mother so long. He angled his body to block her face again, but his trunk stayed lower now, wavering. The dog wasn't charging. The dog wasn't staring. That mattered. Milo's ears lifted a fraction, catching Ranger's soft paw steps like a question. Ranger stopped at a respectful distance and sat down. Not a command sit, an easy, natural one, like he was settling in for a long wait. His head turned slightly away, eyes half-lidded, body loose. In the harsh light, that small act looked almost like a bow. Milo didn't understand dogs, but he understood patience. The wind pushed harder, dragging sand across the clay in thin sheets. Milo flinched, then steadied. He stared at Ranger, trunk raised just enough to test the air. The dog didn't flinch back. He simply breathed, slow and steady, as if lending Milo his rhythm. Sarah felt her pulse begin to match it. Rick shifted beside her, voice low. "He's going to spook," he warned. Sarah kept her gaze soft. "Not if nobody makes him choose between fear and loyalty," she whispered. Milo's loyalty was a chain right now, beautiful and deadly at the same time. She needed a third option, a bridge. Evan, still shaken from earlier, tried to make himself invisible. Yet he couldn't stop watching Milo's trunk glide over the cow's ear, tracing the edge like memory. The calf's eyes looked swollen, but there was no wildness in them, only exhaustion. The kind that comes when a heart refuses to accept what the body already knows. A burst of radio chatter snapped through the air. Milo's ears shot wide, his legs tensed, ready to spring. Sarah raised a hand, palm down, and the Rangers immediately lowered their radios and turned their bodies sideways, less threatening. Rick silently cursed his own device and muted it. The herd instinct in Milo was screaming, and he had no herd to answer. Ranger stayed seated. He didn't look at Milo. He didn't look at the mother. He looked at the ground, as if saying, "I'm not here to take anything." The calf's breathing slowed by a thread. He took one careful step forward, then stopped, torn between curiosity and the gravity of his mother's stillness. On the ridge, the pickup's engine finally coughed to life. A low growl carried on the wind, too far for words, close enough for warning. Rick's eyes narrowed. "That's not a ranch hand," he murmured. Two Rangers peeled off quietly, moving to a higher position without breaking Milo's line of sight. Milo heard the engine too. He swung his head toward the sound, then back to his mother, then to Ranger. His trunk lifted and curled, as if he wanted to call out but didn't know who to call. He pressed his forehead to his mother's shoulder once more, then hesitated. Just a pause, the first crack in the wall. Sarah signaled with 2 fingers to a Ranger near the SUV. A large water jug was lifted, then set down gently about 30 yards away, far enough to not feel like bait, close enough to be discovered. No one approached it. No one pointed. Ranger stood, padded a few steps toward it, then sat again, patient, casual, unforced. Milo watched the dog's movement like it was a new kind of language. He took another step, then another, slow as if stepping through grief itself. But when the wind surged, he froze and glanced back at his mother, panic flickering. Ranger didn't keep going. He turned and walked back a few paces, then sat, right where Milo could see him. In that moment, Sarah understood what was happening. Ranger wasn't leading. He was offering. He was saying, "You can go and come back. You can take one step without betrayal." Milo's trunk dropped slightly, his ears easing down from their widest spread. The storm was still coming, the truck was still there, but Milo, just barely, was still listening. The wind kept scraping the ground, impatient now, as if the desert wanted the scene erased. Milo stood halfway between his mother and the strange old dog, caught in a tug-of-war no one could see. He lifted his trunk and tasted the air again. Dust, hot metal, the faintest trace of water, and underneath it all, the fading perfume of his mother's skin. Ranger didn't hurry him. He rose, took a few unbothered steps toward the water jug, then sat with his back legs tucked neatly under him. Not a command, not a trick, just a steady presence. Milo watched every motion, eyes glossy but sharp. His ears flicked forward, then back, like doors that couldn't decide whether to open or stay locked. Sarah crouched lower near the SUV, speaking quietly into Rick's ear. "No sudden moves, no staring. Let him choose the pace," she said. Rick's gaze stayed on the ridgeline, where the pickup had shifted position again, slow as a predator pretending to be bored. His mouth tightened. Time was thinning out. Milo took one step. The ground crunched under his toenail, and he froze like he'd broken a rule. He turned his head, looking back at his mother's still body, and his chest rumbled, small, cracked, pleading. He stepped back and pressed his face into her hide again, searching for the heartbeat that used to answer him. Nothing answered, not even the insects. Ranger stood and returned, stopping where Milo could see him clearly. Then he sat again, closer this time, but still respectful. Milo blinked hard, as if the dog's patience was confusing in a world that had suddenly become cruel. Milo's trunk slid over his mother's ear one more time, slow and careful, like tracing the edge of a goodbye he wasn't ready to speak. Sarah signaled for the water to be moved a little closer, but not near the body. A ranger carried the jug with both hands like it was fragile, set it down softly, and backed away without turning his back. Ranger walked to it and drank, loud on, purpose, slurping, swallowing, making the kind of noise that says, "This is safe. This is normal." Milo's nostrils flared. Milo leaned forward, stretching his trunk toward the jug without moving his feet. He sniffed, pulled back, sniffed again. His eyes darted to his mother, then to Sarah, then to Ranger. The calf's whole body trembled with the effort of wanting two impossible things at once: to stay with her and to stop hurting. Another gust hit. Sand skated across Milo's legs, stinging the tender skin behind his knees. His ears snapped wide and his muscles tensed, ready to bolt. Ranger didn't flinch. He simply lowered his head and breathed slow. Milo's breath hitched, then matched the dog's rhythm for one shaky moment. That tiny sink calmed him more than any rope ever could. Milo finally placed one foot forward, then another, moving as if each step was a confession. He stopped halfway, staring at the water. His trunk hovered over the surface, wavering. Then he looked back, one long look at his mother's face. His mouth opened slightly, and a low mourning rumble seeped out, a sound older than his own short life. Ranger took one step back from the jug and sat again, making space. Milo edged closer, trunk stretching farther until the tip finally touched the rim. He flinched at the cold, then steadied. Slowly, he drew water up, lifted it to his mouth, and drank. Not eagerly, not greedily, like someone accepting medicine. Sarah felt her eyes burn. Rick exhaled, the first full breath he'd taken in an hour. "He's drinking," Evan whispered, like saying it out loud might break it. Milo drank again, and a little water spilled down his chin. He didn't care. For a few seconds, he was only a baby who was thirsty, not a guardian of the dead. Then he paused, listening for her again. Milo turned abruptly and started back toward his mother, panic rising as if he'd betrayed her by living. Ranger stood immediately and walked with him, not ahead, not pulling, just matching his pace. Milo reached her side and pressed into her body, reassured by the familiar shape, even as it stayed unbearably still. Ranger sat down a short distance away, willing to wait through the return trip without judgment. On the ridge, the pickup's door opened. A figure stepped out, small against the sky, watching. Rick's hand floated toward his radio, then stopped. He didn't want the crackle to spook Milo. Two rangers quietly shifted to cover, moving through the grass like shadows. Sarah's stomach tightened. Whatever that truck was, it was too patient to be innocent. Milo lifted his head again, sensing tension he couldn't name. He looked at Ranger, then at the water jug, then at his mother. The storm edge was closer now, the light turning brown and uneasy. Milo's ears flicked forward, less defensive, more curious. He took a step away from his mother, stopped, then took another. Ranger stood and moved a few paces toward the corridor. The Rangers had formed, and then it happened, small enough to miss if you blinked. Milo reached out with his trunk, not toward the water, not toward Sarah, but toward Ranger. The tip of his trunk brushed the dog's tail, a gentle tap like a question answered. Ranger didn't turn. He didn't startle. He simply stayed steady. Milo's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he moved forward without rushing back. Sarah didn't celebrate. Nobody did. They held the silence like a fragile cup. Milo walked a few slow steps away from the body, then paused and looked back one more time. His chest rumbled, softer now, like a final promise. Ranger sat beside him, close enough to share the air, far enough to let Milo keep his dignity. The storm still came, but Milo, just barely, was choosing to go on. Milo moved in slow pieces, like his legs belonged to another story. He followed Ranger a few paces, then stopped, then followed again, each step pulled forward by trust and dragged back by memory. The air tasted drier now, gritty as chalk. Behind him, his mother's shape lay unchanged, a dark island in a sea of gold grass. The Rangers widened the corridor, bodies turned sideways, eyes lowered, giving him room to believe he wasn't being chased. Sarah stayed near the rear, close enough to help, far enough to not crowd him. Milo kept glancing back, ears flicking, trunk lifting to catch the scent he didn't want to lose. Ranger paused every time Milo paused, like a metronome for grief. Wind surged, and the world began to blur at the edges. Dust rolled low across the ground, crawling around ankles and tires. Milo flinched and pressed his shoulder into Ranger's side for a heartbeat. Just a brush. Then pulled away, embarrassed by his own need. Sarah saw it anyway, that instinctive reach for a living anchor, and it tightened something behind her ribs. Rick murmured into his radio without letting it crackle. "Move on my signal," he told two Rangers posted higher up. His eyes kept cutting to the ridge. The pickup had shifted again, idling now, angled toward the scene. Too quiet, too still. Evan swallowed and squinted into the haze, trying to see the driver's face, but the windshield flashed and hid everything. Milo took another step, then another, closer to the water jug's scent trail. Ranger stood and padded forward, then sat, showing the direction without demanding it. Milo copied him in a clumsy way, front legs stiff, back legs folding under, resting for a second as if his bones were suddenly older. He exhaled a low, trembling rumble that sounded like asking permission to survive. A Ranger slipped past on the far side, moving toward the cow's body with care. He didn't touch her. He only scanned the ground. Then he froze and held up something small between two fingers, metal, dull and bent, half buried in the dirt. Rick's face tightened. "Where'd you find that?" he mouthed. The Ranger pointed near the cow's neck. Sarah's eyes tracked to the rubbed ring on the hide again, and a cold thought clicked into place. Not natural, not clean. Something had been there, and someone had wanted it gone. The pickup on the ridge suddenly felt closer, even across the distance. Rick's hand signaled, "Pull back from the body. Don't give anyone a reason to come down here." Milo didn't know any of that. He only felt the human's energy shift, the way animals feel thunder before it breaks. His ears snapped wide, and he swung his trunk toward the ridge, tasting the air. He caught a new scent: oil, hot rubber, human sweat riding the wind. His body tensed, and for a second, Sarah feared he would bolt straight back to his mother, to the only place that made sense. Ranger stood and walked a small circle, then sat again, calm as a stone. Milo's attention snapped back to him. The dog's steadiness was louder than the wind. Milo took a step toward Ranger, then another, and the corridor held. But the storm pushed harder, pelting, his eyes with sand. He stumbled, knees buckling, and the world tilted. Milo went down hard on one side, not in panic, just in exhaustion. His breath came fast and shallow, trunk curling tight against his chest, like a child clutching a blanket. Evan started forward on instinct, but Rick caught his arm. "No," Rick hissed. "He'll spook." Sarah's heart hammered. If Milo stayed down, the storm would bury this decision. Rick reached for the dart case, fingers already finding the latch. "We lift him now," he said. Sarah stepped in front of the case, not touching it, just blocking the motion with her body. "Give him 1 more minute," she said, voice firm, almost gentle. She lowered herself to a knee at a distance and spoke into the wind, slow and steady. "You're safe. You're not alone." Ranger walked to Milo and stopped just short of contact. He didn't push. He didn't lick. He simply turned and took 2 steps away, then looked back with his whole body. Invitation, without pressure. Milo blinked through dust, saw the dog's shape, and something inside him chose. He unfolded his legs, shaking, and rose again, swaying, but standing. Milo took 3 steps, then paused and turned his head back toward where his mother lay. The dust had begun to veil her, softening her edges like the world was already letting her go. Milo lifted his trunk high, searching, and released a long, low call that shivered through the air. Then he lowered his trunk, touched Ranger's tail once more, and followed him into the thickening storm. By the time they reached the ranger station, the sky had turned the color of dirty cotton. Dust pressed against the windows in steady waves, and the floodlights made the air look like it was filled with ash. Milo stood in the sheltered yard, legs spread slightly for balance, blinking as if he didn't trust the ground anymore. The station wasn't a zoo, and it wasn't a sanctuary. It was a rough patch of fenced dirt with water tanks, medical crates, and the smell of diesel that never fully left. Sarah kept her movements slow, her voice lower than the wind. Rick's team shut gates quietly, careful not to make the clang sound like a trap closing. Milo didn't fight them. He didn't cooperate either. He simply stopped, head lowered, trunk hanging as if it had gotten too heavy to lift. Ranger lay down a few yards away, facing him, but not staring. Every so often the dog thumped his tail once, like a heartbeat on the ground. Milo's ears flicked at the sound, then fell again. They offered water in a wide basin. Milo drank only when his body demanded it, short pulls that barely wet his mouth. When Sarah laid out fresh hay and cut greens, he didn't even sniff. His eyes stayed fixed on nothing, a blank stare that looked like the world had gone too far away to reach. Rick tried again, softer now that the immediate danger had passed. "We can get a transport in the morning," he said. "A larger facility. Real barns. Better feed." Sarah nodded, but her gaze didn't leave Milo. "Morning is a long time for a calf who's already halfway gone," she replied. Rick wanted to argue. He didn't. The first night came down hard. The storm eased, but the silence felt heavier without the wind to blame. Milo stood in the same spot for hours, barely shifting his feet. Sarah set up a folding cot just outside the fence line, close enough to watch his chest rise and fall, far enough to not crowd him. Ranger refused to stay inside. He curled on the dirt, loyal as a shadow. Evan brought coffee in a paper cup, hands shaking as he held it out. "I'm sorry," he said, voice small. Sarah accepted the cup, but didn't drink. "Don't apologize to me," she told him gently. "Learn from him. That's the only thing that helps." Evan looked at Milo, and for the first time he understood that rescue could feel like loss. Near midnight, Milo swayed and almost went down again. Sarah's breath caught, and she stood fast, ready to run if needed. But Milo held himself upright, trembling. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't resting. He was waiting for a sound that would never return, like a child refusing bed until a parent comes home. Sarah sat back down and spoke into the dark, not because Milo understood English, but because tone traveled deeper than words. She talked about ordinary things: cool water, safe fences, the morning sun. Then, without planning to, she said something that changed the shape of her voice. "I know what it's like," she whispered, "to lose someone and not want to keep going." Rick watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his face unreadable in the light. He didn't know Sarah's story in detail. He only knew the way she kept showing up, night after night, for animals that didn't belong to her. He saw her shoulders dip as if she was carrying more than gear. He looked away, giving her privacy, like a gift. Milo's trunk moved for the first time in hours, just an inch. It lifted slightly, then fell. But it was a choice. Sarah held still, heart thudding, afraid to turn that tiny motion into a performance. Milo's ears angled toward her voice, not wide, not defensive, just listening. The smallest sign that the world was still reaching him. At dawn, headlights swept into the yard. A second vehicle arrived, dust-coated, quiet. A woman stepped out in a practical jacket, hair pulled back, eyes alert, but kind. Dr. Nina Park. She took in Milo's rigid stance, Ranger's position, Sarah's cot by the fence, and she understood the situation without being told. "He hasn't eaten," Sarah said, voice rough from sleep she hadn't gotten. Nina nodded once. "Of course he hasn't," she replied softly. "Right now, food isn't the problem." She looked at Milo the way you look at a storm-damaged house, deciding where it's safe to touch. "Grief has to be fed first," she said. "Then hunger can come back." Morning light came thin and pale after the storm, as if the sun was tired too. Milo still stood where he'd stood all night, head lowered, eyes half open, body present, but spirit somewhere else. Nina didn't walk straight toward him. She sat on an overturned bucket near Sarah, keeping her posture soft, letting her calm be the first thing Milo noticed. Sarah offered fresh greens again and watched Milo ignore them like they weren't real. Nina shook her head gently. "Stop asking his mouth to do what his heart hasn't agreed to yet," she murmured. "Give him routine. Give him choice. Give him quiet." Ranger rose, stretched, and sat a few yards from Milo, the same patient angle as always. They began with the smallest, safest rhythm. Ranger drank first. Nina placed a handful of hay down, then stepped back. Sarah sat in her folding chair and spoke in a low, steady voice, telling Milo about nothing and everything. How the wind would ease, how mornings always came back. She didn't beg. She didn't command. She simply stayed. And staying became a language. By midday, Milo's trunk drifted toward the water basin without him moving his feet. He drank 2 slow pulls, then stopped. His ears flicked forward when Ranger crunched kibble loudly, almost rude on purpose. Milo watched the dog's jaw work, the ordinary certainty of eating, like it was a trick. Nina raised her eyebrows at Sarah. "He's noticing," she whispered. That afternoon, a transport report came in over Rick's radio. No trucks available until the next day, maybe later. The larger facility was 3 hours north, and the roads were still gritty from the storm. Rick paced, frustrated. "We can't keep him here forever," he said. Nina's gaze stayed on Milo. "We're not keeping him," she answered. "We're teaching him the world didn't end." As the heat climbed, Milo finally moved, just a few steps, stiff and slow, toward the shade of a steel awning. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hopeful. It was simply his body choosing less pain. Sarah didn't cheer. She only shifted her chair so she could still be near without blocking his space. Ranger followed and lay down in the shade too, making it feel shared. Late in the day, Evan returned with a battered rubber feed bucket and a length of hose. He set them down quietly, careful not to repeat yesterday's mistake. "Thought it might help," he said, uncertain. Nina nodded once. "Leave it," she told him. "Let curiosity find it when grief loosens its grip." Evan backed away like he was leaving an offering. At sunset, Sarah's voice changed again without warning. She spoke about her own loss, not in details, but in the shape of it. The way mornings could feel like betrayal, the way breathing could feel like permission you didn't deserve. "Some days I woke up and forgot," she said softly. "And then I remembered, and it felt like losing him all over again." Her words broke slightly on him. Milo's head lifted, not high, just enough. His eyes turned toward Sarah, and for the first time it was real eye contact. Not scanning, not guarding, but seeing. Nina held her breath. Ranger didn't move. The station yard seemed to quiet around that look, as if the whole place understood it was witnessing the first crack in a sealed door. In the cool of early night, Milo's trunk reached down and brushed the hay pile. He didn't eat. He just touched it, then pulled back. He touched it again, longer this time, feeling the texture, testing the scent. Ranger stood and walked to his bowl, crunching loudly, then sat and waited. Milo's ears flicked forward, the smallest sign of interest. Then, slowly, so slowly, Sarah almost doubted her own eyes, Milo lifted a single dry strand of hay with the tip of his trunk. He held it there, trembling, as if deciding whether life was allowed. Nina's hand clenched around her mug. Sarah didn't blink. Milo placed the hay in his mouth, chewed once, twice, mechanical and joyless, then swallowed. The sound was nothing, just a tiny grind of teeth, but Sarah felt it like a thunderclap. Tears slid down her face without permission. Milo took another strand, smaller, and chewed again, as if testing whether the world would punish him for it. Ranger's tail thumped once against the dirt, soft, steady approval. Milo didn't react, but he didn't stop. Later, when the yard went quiet, Milo stepped closer to the old hose Evan had left. He nudged it with his trunk, then backed away. A cautious curiosity, a faint return of the baby underneath the grief. Nina watched and murmured, That's the turn. Not healing. Just turning. Sarah nodded, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. That night, Milo didn't stand in one spot until dawn. He shifted his feet. He lowered his head onto the dirt for a few minutes, then lifted it again. It wasn't sleep. Not really. But it was rest. Sarah sat with Ranger's, head on her boot, listening to Milo's breathing even out in small waves. Somewhere inside that young body, something fragile had decided to stay. The next week unfolded in small mercies. Milo ate a little more each day, not with hunger, but with willingness. He followed Ranger to the water trough, shadowing the dog's steady pace like it was a map out of darkness. When the transport trailer finally arrived, Milo didn't resist. He only froze, then leaned into Ranger's shoulder for one long breath. The drive north was slow and careful, the kind of drive where every pothole feels personal. Sarah rode beside the trailer, watching Milo through the slats as dust rolled past like pale smoke. Milo swayed with every turn, ears twitching at unfamiliar sounds. When fear rose, Ranger pressed close, and Milo's trunk found the dog's tail again, his quiet way of saying, "Don't leave me." The sanctuary gates appeared at midday. Wide land, high fences, shaded groves, water shimmering in a distant basin. It smelled different here. Damp soil, fresh browse, elephant. Milo lifted his head for the first time in days and tasted the air like it mattered. Somewhere beyond the trees, a low rumble answered, deep enough to feel through the trailer walls. They unloaded Milo into a holding paddock that was open, not cramped, with space to move and room to breathe. He stepped down carefully, testing the ground, then stopped as if he'd forgotten how to proceed without his mother's body behind him. Ranger trotted a small circle, sniffed, then sat. Milo watched, ears forward, borrowing the dog's confidence one more time. Sarah met Daisy that afternoon, the sanctuary's older matriarch, thick-bodied and scarred in ways that spoke of a long life. Daisy had lost a calf years ago. The staff said she never forgot. She stood at the edge of the herd, trunk raised, reading Milo's scent like a letter. Milo stiffened, ears spreading wide, fear flashing through him like lightning. Nina didn't rush the moment. She stood with Sarah and spoke softly, mostly for Sarah's nerves. "He can't be carried into belonging," she said. "He has to walk into it." Milo shifted his weight, staring at Daisy, then back at Sarah, then back at Ranger. He wanted his old family and his new one at the same time, and the wanting hurt. On the 5th morning, they opened the paddock gate during the herd's calm routine. The opening looked enormous, like a doorway into a world Milo wasn't sure he deserved. Daisy waited 50 yards away, still as a boulder, her trunk hanging loose in a gesture of peace. The herd behind her moved slowly, curious, but not crowding. Milo didn't go toward Daisy. He went toward Sarah. He crossed the paddock with sudden speed and wrapped his trunk around her leg, holding tight. Sarah dropped to her knees, forehead against his shoulder, trying to keep her voice from breaking. In that grip was every no he couldn't say out loud, every stay he didn't know was impossible. Rick stood back, hat in his hands, the hard edges of him softened by the sight. Evan wiped his eyes and looked away, ashamed of how close he'd come to forcing this. Sarah whispered promises Milo couldn't understand in words, only in tone. She promised she would return. She promised he wasn't being abandoned. Her voice shook anyway. Then Ranger did something no one asked him to do. He walked out through the open gate first, slow, deliberate, calm. He stopped near Daisy's feet and sat down, chin lifted, as if offering himself as proof. Daisy lowered her trunk and touched the top of Ranger's head, gentle as a blessing. The dog didn't flinch. He simply stayed. Milo watched that touch like it was a sign written in the air. Ranger had never lied to him. Ranger had led him to water, to shade, to the first bite of hay. If Ranger said this giant stranger was safe, then maybe safe could exist again. Milo released Sarah's leg and took one step, toward the gate, then another, trembling but moving. At the threshold, Milo stopped and looked back. Sarah stood still, hands at her sides, letting him choose without pulling. Milo rumbled softly, low and uncertain, then stepped through. Daisy met him halfway and touched his forehead with her trunk, the unmistakable gesture of an elephant mother. Milo leaned into it, eyes closing for a second, as if his body remembered what comfort was. 2 weeks later, Milo was no longer a visitor. He walked with the herd, learned their paths, copied their dust baths, listened to their language. He still ran to the fence when Sarah arrived, still reached for Ranger's tail when he felt unsure. But he began to spend his nights pressed against warm elephant bodies, not alone under floodlights. The world was rebuilding its shape. Years passed in quiet chapters. Ranger's muzzle turned white, his steps slower, but his eyes stayed bright when Sarah drove up the long sanctuary road. Milo grew tall and powerful, his grief no longer a cage, but a scar he carried with dignity. Then, one evening, Milo came to the fence with a tiny calf at his side, wobbly legs, oversized ears, curious as dawn. The baby reached through the bars toward Ranger, and the old dog leaned forward to touch noses, gentle and steady. Milo rumbled, deep and content, and Sarah felt the sound settle in her bones like peace. The sun sank behind the trees, turning everything gold. Love hadn't ended out in the desert. It had changed shape, and it had come back, bringing new life with it. If this story hit you in the heart, I want to hear from you. Comment 0 if you believe Milo was saying, "I'm not leaving her." Comment 1 if you think he was saying, "I'm ready to live." And if you've ever loved someone so deeply it changed you, drop a heart. No words needed. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story is even more unbelievable. And it's coming right up.